The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber buzzed with quiet anticipation, the kind that only forms when powerful people prepare to clash. Ted Cruz entered with his trademark confidence, every step measured, his Texas boots echoing softly against the polished floors. The familiar smirk was in place, the one that had become synonymous with his reputation as the Senate's most relentless debater. Today, he believed, would be just another performance in his ongoing theater of political dominance. His target, Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Dallas, a figure many in the room had underestimated. Cruz imagined the narrative already forming in his mind. A quick verbal takedown, a soundbite for his base, a quiet dismissal of a rookie who hadn't yet learned the ruthlessness of Washington. The room, packed with journalists, staffers, and activists, hummed with tension. Republican senators were perched in their seats, scrolling casually on phones, confident the routine would proceed as expected. Democratic aides whispered quietly to each other, sensing that something more combustible was brewing. Even the C-SPAN cameras seemed to lean in, capturing every angle, every potential spark that might ignite a political spectacle. Cruz began his preamble with the ease of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times. He complimented the witnesses, asked sharp, pointed questions about federal election oversight, and crafted each inquiry to highlight perceived flaws in Democratic testimony. Crockett sat quietly in the observer section, notes in hand, her expression neutral, her posture deliberate. She wasn't supposed to speak. She was there to observe, to represent her district's interests silently. But her eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail, analyzing the strategy, weighing each word that crossed the committee dais. Her experience as a public defender had trained her for this moment. She had faced hostile attorneys, judges who underestimated her, and opponents who thought their authority would silence her. Cruz, in his arrogance, assumed this freshman would crumble under scrutiny, that she would offer nothing but the polite nods and hesitant responses typical of someone so new to Congress. Cruz, sensing an opening, decided to make the exchange personal, a classic tactic he had honed over decades. "It's interesting," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "how the House sends its most inexperienced members to observe serious Senate business." His words landed deliberately, a soft chuckle rippling through the Republican seats. It was the kind of barb meant to assert dominance, to subtly undermine Crockett before she even had a chance to respond. He leaned back slightly, smirk widening, imagining the viral clip that would be captured by staffers and conservative media alike. But Crockett did not react immediately. The silence stretched thick and expectant. Every person in the chamber seemed to sense that something unprecedented was about to happen. Cruz, emboldened, continued, "I suppose when your district's voters don't fully understand the complexities of constitutional law, you send representatives who reflect that level of understanding." The words carried coded implications, a slight toward the district she represented, a subtle questioning of her competence, wrapped in the veneer of constitutional debate. It was textbook Cruz, insult wrapped in plausible deniability. The committee chairman shifted uncomfortably. Democratic senators' expressions tightened. Senator Cory Booker glanced up, eyebrows furrowed. Senator Amy Klobuchar whispered to an aide, her concern evident. Cruz, however, pressed on, reveling in the performance, completely unaware that he had misjudged his opponent. Then came the moment that would shift the entire room's energy. Crockett rose from her seat. There was no hesitation, no faltering. Her movement was deliberate, controlled, commanding attention without the need for words. The room seemed to collectively inhale, the usual shuffling of papers and soft murmurs falling away. All eyes were on her, the quiet freshman, the observer, now the center of a brewing storm. "Senator Cruz," she began, her voice calm but carrying authority. "I appreciate your concern about my district's priorities. Perhaps it's time we discuss them directly." The words were measured, each syllable precise yet loaded with weight. Cruz's smirk faltered slightly. He had expected a stumble, a fumbling reply, not this poised and deliberate challenge. The staffers who had been recording and tweeting moments of the hearing paused, unsure if they had just witnessed the opening of an entirely new narrative. Crockett continued, stepping slightly forward. The air in the chamber shifted, palpable with tension. "My constituents are not naive," she said, her gaze unwavering. "They are teachers buying classroom supplies out of their own pockets. nurses working double shifts during a pandemic, small business owners keeping doors open against impossible odds, veterans who served this country with honor, only to return to a system that treats them as political props. Each example landed like a strategic blow. Cruz's previous attempt to belittle her district's voters now backfired spectacularly. His argument, built on condescension, unraveled under the weight of Crockett's detailed values-based recounting. Republican senators shifted uncomfortably, their earlier amusement replaced by recognition that the freshman was not only holding her ground, she was dismantling the narrative he had carefully constructed. "You mentioned constitutional law," Crockett said, her tone sharpening but never rising to aggression. "Let's talk about it. I have spent years as a public defender, actively using the Constitution to protect people's rights. While you were performing filibusters for television, I was in courtrooms fighting for justice for those who had none." Cruz attempted to interrupt, his voice rising slightly. "Congresswoman, I think you're mischaracterizing." "I'm not done." "Senator," Crockett said, cutting him off with the authority of someone who had learned to command attention in the most hostile environments. The simple sentence resonated across the room, instantaneous and electric. Cruz, known for never allowing an opponent to finish a thought, was caught off guard. His face, usually a mask of control, showed genuine surprise. The silence that followed was complete. Even the most seasoned journalists instinctively held their breath. Crockett's methodical dismantling continued, her words precise and unflinching. "My constituents sent me here not because they misunderstand constitutional law," she said, eyes locked on Cruz. "They sent me here because they understand the value of representation, the importance of service, and the difference between leadership that serves and leadership that postures. And they deserve respect, not condescension." The contrast could not have been starker. Cruz, the master of committee theatrics, found himself outmaneuvered by someone who had honed her skills not in political theater, but in the courtroom, under pressure, with lives and rights on the line. Every phrase Crockett delivered reinforced her credibility, her authority, and the undeniable competence that Cruz had underestimated. The room remained frozen in tension. Staffers, aides, and senators alike watched in stunned silence. Democratic aides quickly pulled out phones to capture the moment, recognizing that the exchange was more than a hearing. It was history unfolding live. Republican staffers looked at one another, a mixture of shock and admiration passing across faces usually immune to freshman audacity. Crockett paused briefly, letting her words sink into the charged atmosphere of the chamber. "Senator Cruz, what I've observed today is a pattern familiar to many. When someone assumes power gives them the right to belittle, intimidate, or dominate, they often crumble when confronted with preparation, principle, and courage. Today I stand before you and your colleagues not to beg for respect, but to demand it for those I represent." Her final statement reverberated like a drumbeat through the chamber. Cruz, for the first time in decades of political combat, had no immediate retort. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the weight of the moment palpable. Chairs creaked, papers rustled softly, but no one dared break the spell. This wasn't routine political theater. This was a freshman congresswoman redefining what confrontation could look like. As Crockett gathered her materials, calm and composed, the social media storm was already brewing. Clips captured the stunned expression of Cruz, juxtaposed with Crockett's unwavering poise. The narrative was clear. The master debater had been bested by preparation, courage, and moral authority. Observers knew immediately that this moment would define careers, shift perceptions, and inspire a new generation of political actors. Within minutes, the viral potential of Crockett's performance became apparent. Conservative and liberal audiences alike were captivated. Analysts would later describe this as the moment the dynamics of Washington power subtly but irreversibly shifted. A reminder that underestimating a freshman, especially one shaped by real-world experience and courage, could be a grave miscalculation. The chamber remained suspended in silence, a rare stillness that only historic moments carry. Ted Cruz, once the master of public spectacle, now sat frozen in disbelief, his usual smirk replaced by the unmistakable strain of shock. The cameras lingered on his face, capturing every flicker of emotion. A politician unmasked. Meanwhile, Crockett's calm authority radiated across the room, a quiet but undeniable force commanding attention from senators, staffers, and journalists alike. Within moments, The significance of what had just unfolded began to resonate. Social media erupted. Clips of Crockett's statement spread like wildfire on Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. "I'm not done, Senator" became an instant catchphrase, replayed in countless variations with users dissecting every inflection, gesture, and pause. Hashtags like "Dark Crockett Clapback" and "Our Bullies Crumble" trended nationally, not because of flashy theatrics, but because her words carried undeniable substance. Even conservative commentators, usually quick to defend Cruz, paused to acknowledge the power of her delivery. Cable news networks immediately seized the moment. MSNBC devoted segment after segment to analyzing Crockett's courtroom-honed precision, breaking down how her calm demeanor, factual grounding, and moral authority had neutralized Cruz's years of experience in debate and political strategy. CNN brought in political psychologists and body language experts, all dissecting the instant Cruz's expression shifted from dominance to vulnerability. The Atlantic ran a long-form piece titled, "The Death of the Political Bully," framing Crockett's performance as a defining example of courage and preparation prevailing over institutional power. The impact was not confined to the cameras. In Texas, local news stations ran extended coverage, replaying the exchange continuously. The Dallas Morning News website experienced unprecedented traffic, crashing as viewers attempted to access the full video. Radio call-in shows were flooded with listeners debating the encounter. Within days, polling reflected a dramatic shift. Crockett's approval rating soared, climbing 15 points while Cruz's dipped 8, with independent voters increasingly sympathetic to her message. Crockett's rise was immediate and tangible. Major Democratic donors, previously unaware of her, began including her in high-level fundraising events. Grassroots organizations and activists praised her deft handling of Cruz's attacks, using her example as a blueprint for engaging with senior political figures. Within hours, small-dollar donations poured in from across the country, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars within a week. This viral moment was transforming her from a quietly diligent freshman into a national political force. Meanwhile, Cruz scrambled to regain control. Hours after the hearing ended, he issued a carefully worded tweet. "I have great respect for all my House colleagues," and was simply trying to facilitate productive dialogue about the important constitutional issues facing our nation. The response was met with widespread ridicule. Analysts pointed out that the tweet lacked the usual precision, aggression, and confidence that characterized his public persona. Conservative media, caught off guard by Crockett's poised counterattack, struggled to spin the moment in Cruz's favor. Even Fox News devoted more time to the breakdown of decorum than to defending Cruz's original critique. The incident sparked a broader conversation about political bullying and the treatment of women of color in Congress. For the first time in decades, discussions about institutional respect, hierarchy, and preparation dominated the airwaves. Leadership programs, business schools, and law schools began using Crockett's confrontation as a case study. Her example became shorthand for the lesson that courage, preparation, and moral clarity could overturn even the most entrenched power structures. 6 months later, when Cruz and Crockett faced each other again in another committee hearing, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Cruz, wary and measured, maintained a respectful demeanor, focusing strictly on policy questions without personal attacks. The bully who had sought to humiliate a freshman had learned that some opponents do not bow, and that a well-prepared individual can neutralize years of political theater. The Crockett effect began influencing other junior members of Congress, who increasingly took assertive positions in committee hearings, emboldened by her example. The long-term consequences for Cruz were significant. Already navigating a challenging political landscape in a state trending purple, he now faced heightened scrutiny from both constituents and media alike. His once unshakable image as a master debater had been publicly challenged, leaving him vulnerable to criticism and political attacks. Campaign strategists began reassessing his future prospects, recognizing that beneath the Harvard credentials and legal expertise, Cruz had faltered under direct confrontation with a principled, prepared opponent. For Crockett, the fallout was entirely positive. She became a sought-after voice in national politics, invited to speak at events, conferences, and leadership summits. Her viral performance elevated her profile beyond the Texas delegation, establishing her as a rising star with both political acumen and the ability to inspire broad audiences. She was no longer just a freshman observer. She was a standard-bearer for a new generation of politicians, proving that authenticity, preparation, and courage could challenge even the most powerful figures in Congress. Media coverage continued for weeks, evolving from initial reactions to in-depth analyses. Political strategists dissected her tactics, noting how her calm, factual, and morally grounded responses neutralized Cruz's aggressive interrogation. Late-night comedians incorporated the exchange into monologues, while Saturday Night Live created sketches satirizing the dramatic reversal in power dynamics. International media also picked up the story, highlighting it as an example of generational and demographic shifts in American politics. The confrontation also inspired broader institutional changes. Congressional committee chairs introduced new guidelines to prevent senior members from using observers and junior members as targets for personal attacks. Informally known as the Crockett Rules, these changes sought to preserve legislative oversight while preventing ambushes that relied on intimidation or disparagement. Her performance became a blueprint for handling hostile encounters, teaching that preparation, courage, and moral authority could alter the course of political debates. Beyond politics, the moment transcended into broader cultural relevance. Corporate leaders, educators, and community organizers referenced Crockett's response when discussing how to stand up to bullies and institutional power. Workshops on negotiation, leadership, and crisis management incorporated her example. Business schools used it to teach power dynamics, highlighting how authenticity and principle can outmatch hierarchy and intimidation. Years later, the Crockett-Cruz exchange remained a defining case study in political courage. It symbolized a generational shift in American politics, where preparation and principle could challenge long-standing hierarchies and theatrical displays of authority. Crockett had not only defended her constituents and herself, but had also demonstrated the enduring power of integrity and poise under pressure. Looking back, the lessons were clear and enduring. Bullies rely on silence, hierarchy, and perceived experience to maintain control. But when someone steps forward with preparation, courage, and moral clarity, the entire dynamic shifts. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a hearing. She rewrote the expectations for freshman legislators, challenged a prominent figure in Congress, and demonstrated the transformative power of truth spoken with conviction. The political and cultural ripple effects continued to resonate. Freshmen across the nation, especially women of color, drew inspiration from her example. Politicians reconsidered the weight of experience versus preparation. Voters, watching the spectacle unfold in real time, were reminded that authenticity and principle could triumph over spectacle and aggression. Crockett's rise was now intertwined with her district's priorities, her values, and the broader national conversation about leadership. Her measured, factual, and courageous performance became a touchstone, demonstrating that in politics, preparation and integrity could dismantle even the most intimidating power structures. The day she faced Ted Cruz would be remembered not just as a single confrontation, but as the moment a new standard of leadership emerged, one that emphasized courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to the people one represents. As the dust settled, the chamber returned to its routines. Yet the echoes of that confrontation remained, a reminder that the balance of power is never fixed, and that those willing to stand and speak with authority can redefine the narrative. Ted Cruz, once confident of his dominance, had encountered a force he could neither bully nor dismiss. Jasmine Crockett, the underestimated freshman, had become a symbol of preparation, courage, and leadership for a generation.